people have to leave sooner rather than later, so we're bringing up item number 11. So we'll welcome Colin and Mark and whoever else from Auckland Transport.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillors, Mr Chairman, thank you for changing the agenda. We do have a board meeting today, so I have to present a number of papers later on, so thank you. The paper on public transport concessions is a follow-on from a report that we provided to the Council in May last year. That followed on a full review that Auckland Transport did of all our public transport concession fares at the time. And the Council asked for a report back after the 16-17 financial year, just to confirm the actuals on two schemes, the PM Peak Super Gold free travel and also the legacy Auckland Regional Council Senior Citizens scheme. The reason for that was at the time some of the numbers were unclear because we're moving from manual to automated systems, and also the New Zealand Transport Agency, who had been providing 50% funding of those two schemes, chose to withdraw that funding, and now these two schemes are 100% council funding. So we've confirmed that the number of passengers that are carried on the two schemes are 1.6 million per annum at a 100% council cost of 3.24 million. The paper refers to a number of savings that have been achieved. That's because of the automation of the schemes, removal of paper-based tickets, which reduces in fraud, and also working with the New Zealand Transport Agency and Ministry of Transport to ensure that we can transition as many people as possible to the Super Gold Card scheme where they're eligible. At the moment, we do have the budget for this financial year, and we obviously will be including it in the following budgets as well. Really what we're looking for at the moment is an acceptance of the paper. We have put in, we've offered up a couple of options as well to remove the two schemes and also to offer a nominal fare. So I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Councillor Simpson. Yep.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. So can I just have confirmation here? So the concessions are already in for this year, and I get that, but surely the debate is up for debate for the LTP. Is that the process, Mr Chairman? Maybe my question should be to you.
It is.
It is.
Yes.
So all we're doing is receiving the report, noting what it cost and how many people benefit as of last year, and it's in for this year, but then we actually include this as part of everything else for the LTP, correct?
Yes.
Right, thank you.
Right. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mr Chair. Guys, there was...
Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, Bill's fine. There was discussion, the government, Ministry of Transport last year, about actually condensing the payments towards these programs. Where has that gone? Does that have any effect?
So we've moved from a passenger-based subsidy scheme to a bulk-funded scheme. The bulk-funded scheme is intended to cover all of the Super Gold off-peak travel. It excludes these two, which the government don't fund. Yep. So we're on a bulk funding scheme at the moment with sufficient funding for this year.
For the off-peak services? Yep.
For the off-peak Super Gold services.
We weren't going to get a double whammy, that's all right. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Casey.
Did you ask for feedback and receive it from the seniors panel?
We did when we did the full review last year prior to bringing this, so this was really just a report back on the actual cost for 16-17, but we did when we reviewed all the concessions.
Oh good,
previously.
Can you share that with the council?
Sure. I believe we did. Yeah.
A brief summary would do.
Sorry, that was a year ago. It was also part of, from memory, the Regional Public Transport Plan briefings at the time as well, where, unsurprisingly, all the senior organisations came back and said they didn't want to see any reduction in subsidy and any reduction in the schemes, and that's what we're proposing at this point.
Councillor Darby, and you had a question pre the meeting as well.
Thank you, and Mark just replied to that, and I appreciate that, Mark, this morning. Just to follow up on that, Mark, so, and I'll probably just to you at the outset, Chair, you said this is not a budget decision here, it'll be an LTP decision. So does that mean concession fare concessions generally are an LTP decision, or just the concessions for seniors in a particular category?
I would have thought we'd be looking at everything.
So can I then just go, I'm not sure what the mandate is to Auckland Transport to review the fare concessions, which, Mark, you've confirmed to me this morning has been undertaken of recent. My question is probably a little bit wider than the remit of this paper, which is focused on senior concessions. So when you undertook the review, did you take into account health benefits?
Through you,
It's not one of the objectives, but do you take health benefits into account?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, we did, and amongst other things, for the other groups of concessions which are listed there, being tertiary, child, secondary, we take into account the level of transport disadvantage as well.
So when you look at that, so nothing really changed in your review. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So the discount for children and students is currently 40%. Was there any modelling and costing done of increasing that discount rate to, say, 50% and the tertiary rate from 20% to 25%? Or considering, say, community services card holders as a category that could be considered for discounts. Was any modelling or costing undertaken in those categories?
Yes, modelling was undertaken at the time. I don't recall the exact figures now. We also did look at community card holders. The issue we had was around administration of such a scheme, and that it was best for Ministry of Social Development to fund such a scheme, rather than necessarily through Auckland Council.
So is it your expectation that in our LTP discussions we're narrowed to discussing the super gold, mainly PM discount, or is your expectation broader than that? What is Auckland Transport's understanding going into these LTP discussions?
Well, going into the discussions, it'll be as per this paper. So the 6 areas of concessions as proposed will remain the same and will be budgeted for. Of course, any of those are open to discussion as part of that process as well, but that's what we will be budgeting for.
Okay, thank you. And finally, in that, in the executive summary on page 67, attachment A, in that point 6, where we're 100% funding the free off-peak and the PM, has there been any consideration hiring, if that is retained, that discount, and that's currently the case, is there any consideration of that being provided only through a hop card?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, at the moment it is only provided through a hop card.
That is a category that's only provided. So if a visitor a ratepayer from Wellington comes to Auckland, and they don't have an integrated Super Gold with hop or hop card, they're not eligible to it.
That's correct. They'd pay an adult fee.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Lee.
Oh, thank you. Just to give the members some perspective on the wider issue of concessionary fares, can we be reminded how many free events or heavily subsidised events that are put on for rock concerts, sports events and so on? I think it's around about 50 per year, is it?
Although you pay through your ticket.
No, not necessarily.
Could we verbalise the answer? I saw a nod, but...
Sorry, I don't know the exact number. I think it is around 50 in terms of significant events that we contribute towards through particularly either integrated ticketing and or more normally traffic management type of activities and things like that, which obviously cost the ratepayer and the taxpayer money. There is overall around 1,800 events in the city which we do have an input into, but only around 50 of those actually have integrated ticketing for public transport.
Thank you. There's obviously a bigger picture here, and actually the subsidised travel for rock concerts and rugby games and league games is quite unique to Auckland. Wellington doesn't do it. Thank you.
They can all walk to the stadium.
Councillor Fletcher.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Given that this has only really been a concern to us for the last couple of years because of the decision by NZTA to withdraw funding with some of the legacy senior citizens concessions, what are we giving consideration to in terms of any advocacy to central government where there may be policy changes? I would really like for us, before we go down this track, to explore whether there is a desire by the incoming government for there to be a consistency in the treatment of these concessionary cards, because that was at the crux of this issue a couple of years ago, and there may be some policy initiatives that we are as yet unaware of. So I would like us, and I appreciate it's an LTP issue, but I really would like us to be exploring the opportunity for doing a bit more policy work around whether it is the intention of the incoming government to have consistency on concessionary arrangements, or whether they stand by the decision that they've made to withdraw and let AT travel alone on this journey in terms of peak times. I wonder if officers could respond.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, certainly we obviously will be engaging with the new government as soon as possible on a number of issues, including this one. As you rightly put, the previous government and Ministry of Transport and NZTA wanted consistency, but it was at the detriment of some of the initiatives that we already had in place. So it's good that I think we've retained those initiatives moving forward, but we do now need to fully engage with the new government and in particular NZTA officers.
So, Mr. Chairman, my concern would be that while we're simply, really, to a degree, receiving this report today, the report only has the two options. I think it should have contained the opportunity to go back to NZTA. So I wouldn't like implicit behind it, if in the receipt of this report, I would like it explicit that we are going to go back to NZTA and explore that opportunity.
Through you, Mr. Council, sure, we can do that. I'm happy to have a recommendation on those lines.
So, Mr.
Hey,
Chairman.
Councillor Fletcher, you're thinking of a B.
Yes.
You want to just quickly jot something down, or Kevin will note here?
Request Auckland Council go back to NZTA.
Are there any other further questions? Oh, Councillor Hills.
Yeah, it's sort of just a question. Obviously, I wasn't here when the decision was made, but so NZTA withdrew the funding because they wanted consistency across the country, and then we filled the gap. Why did the council or Auckland Transport decide to fund when the whole point of the gold card was for about off-peak travel? Why did?
The original purpose was off-peak travel across the country. There was Nelson and ourselves who, at the time it was introduced in 2008, the ticketing technology did not allow us to actually differentiate, particularly on the legacy senior citizen scheme, the PM Peak. So we continued at that point until 2015 with the review. At the point of the review, it was considered appropriate to continue with the inconsistency, if you like, with the rest of the country, because A, that would mean removing a concession that's already in place for some Aucklanders, and secondly, we were hoping to continually engage with NZTA and actually try and get a better outcome in the future, as opposed to removing something that's already in place. With regards to the PM Peak in particular, it's not a capacity issue for having people at this point travelling on those services, because the PM Peak is more spread in terms of public transport capacity. It is in the AM Peak. If we, for example, chose to apply this to the AM Peak, we would have a capacity issue. So there was no burning bridge at the time to change what we're already providing.
Okay, and is your team doing any investigations on free travel for students or anything during similar times?
Not at this point in time, no.
All right, well, we have, yep, we have a,
Basically, Mr. Chairman, I'm proposing that we invite Auckland Transport to approach NZTA to seek reconfirmation of their current position of funding of concessionary fares, so that it's something that we actually get information from them before we take a position through the NZTA. We are talking about some significant sums of funds, but as we discovered in the last opportunity we had to debate this, there are all sorts of different circumstances. We know that a lot of grandparents are involved in the childcare of their grandchildren and avail themselves of public transport during peak times, and there are lots of circumstances, and it would just be very helpful for NZTA to require confirmation of this position.
Yes, and I think we'll be talking to the incoming government about quite a few transportation matters. Right, here we go. Note Auckland Transport's approach to NZTA to seek reconfirmation of their current position on funding of concessionary fares. Agree with that? Councillor Darby. Yep.
Thank you. Well, look, this is an opportunity to discuss a wider issue here, and I think it's an issue that a lot of young people, they look at the Super Gold Card discount and they go, wow, if only I had that, wouldn't my education be easier? Wouldn't it be easier to get together with my mates and friends across town? And I guess I'm just opening up the opportunity to begin discussions about travel discounts that are more generous to young people, be they students and tertiary, particularly in those categories. And I'm also interested in exploring those that are on community services cards. I have to give credit to Mr. Peters, now forming part of the government, for acknowledging seniors and the health benefits that this does provide to seniors. It gets them out and about and mobile, socialising, a whole host of benefits. And that's across the line, but what's not across the line is providing similar travel benefits to younger people. And while they currently receive discounts of 25% for tertiary students, there are some nuances to that make it quite difficult. If you're doing a certain number of papers but you don't quite qualify for full-time status, you're cut out. There are some discrepancies between educational institutions and the way they structure courses. And then you go to the child and the student discount of currently 40%. We all know that congestion on our roads is at exactly the same time as kids are going to school. I think the decongestion ability of making AM transport and PM transport for students heading to schools is considerable. I think we need to look at that, examine that in more detail in the near future. And I would also like to look at that community services card holder category as well, and deal with the ministries, and hopefully there's some more willing ministries maybe now, because the health issue gets addressed there. The opportunity for those on community services cards to engage with, again, friends in the community, and when you're, for whatever reason, you're a holder of a community services card, and there's a lot in that category, socialising with family and friends, getting out and about is really important. It's also a parenting issue, getting your kids to education by bus when you don't have much income. I think all of that needs to be considered. And one thing I would like Auckland Transport to add to that, those objectives, is a bullet point about health benefits. And this is missing in our transport strategies. The correlation between transport and health is not locked down. And that's a failing at our strategic level. It's a failing at a government level, that the linkages between transport and health benefits are just not acknowledged. Why the Ministry of Health, at least, and the NZTA and the Ministry of Transport don't talk to each other and understand that is beyond me. But look, there's scope now, new beginnings, and I would hope that that discussion does happen so that we can correlate transport and health. It's overdue. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Darwin. I'm sure in discussing that will be in the light of the free tertiary fees for the first year starting next year. I think within 3 years it's free tertiary fees for your undergraduate degree, isn't it? Councillor
First year,
Walker.
yeah.
Sure. Got a follow-up question from Councillor Darby's, and it's really around the level of investigation around higher tertiary subsidies, and that goes to the data that we've got about those trips, which, unlike other trips that could occur anywhere around Auckland, are quite specific. They will be trips to university and the like, and from the perspective of your planning, one would assume you're able to plan for additional capacity in those routes much more easily than planning for, say, senior citizens or other categories. So my question goes further than Chris's and just asks what investigation you've done around that, and also around the aspects of behavioural change, where quite obviously if we can influence students not to travel by car, not to buy a car, to make those sorts of changes, what behavioural change impact that has over time. And I'm assuming
Councillor Walker,
that there's some relevance in that. So, question.
Quite deep there, I know, but you know, this is received the review of the Auckland Transport concessionary fees available to senior citizens, and I hear where Councillor Darby and yourself are coming from, and we will be looking into those things, but whether that's a time to dig too deep today. But Mark, please answer briefly.
We're not looking explicitly at increasing the capacity for tertiary or secondary students at this point, as I mentioned earlier, which would be required if we did change the discount rate, obviously. At present, we currently spend around 3.2 million to provide that tertiary discount. 3.2 million. The child and secondary is 8 to 9 million. So obviously, if we're going to increase the discount, we'd have to both cover off the revenue loss of existing travel, but also additional capacity, as you pointed out, on specific routes. But we're not explicitly looking at that at this point in time.
Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. I just wanted to build on Councillor Fletcher's addition to the recommendation. If we're going to be, if as is proposed, tertiary fees are going to be free, that means students will have more money. So I just want to make sure that if that is the case, why would we then reducing costs again, because they would already have costs offset? Whereas, you know, there may be other ways, you know, that's quite a significant increase in LTP funding if it's not necessary, is what I'm saying. And I'm not saying we shouldn't, but we should just be making sure that we're not, if there's going to be relief from one department and saying no tertiary fees, then you may not need the relief for your bus fare. So I think that's just something to think about as well, because we're going to have some really difficult decisions to make, you know, around this. Just adding and adding is not going to help out make our wider decisions, and it's nice to do lots of little decisions, but when it all adds up, we're in trouble. Thank you.
No, well, that's why I made the comment about the free fares, Councillor Cooper, but no, we haven't made that decision, but it would be just something that would be debated if we were
I'd just like that information too,
Yep.
so that when we do debate, Mr Chairman, we've got all the correct information.
Yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Watson.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Yeah, it's just further to the previous contributors, and really to go to perhaps a wider and nuanced type of review. I accept wholeheartedly the information that's been put on the table today and support that, but I would agree with certainly with Councillor Darby that there is some inequalities across the board, and whether the free tertiary education comes or not is to be seen, but certainly a number of our students who live in the outer suburbs in particular, their travel by public transport is a fairly significant part of their overall spend. I think, for instance, any tertiary students catch the Gulf Harbour ferry. That's basically $16 a day, which is significant, but which is by far and away the most suitable mode of public transport for people at that part of my ward. Further to Councillor Lee's comments about costs over and board. The subsidy for the British Lions Auckland Blues rugby game was $110,000. That was the AT ratepayer subsidy. When you see how those work on the game nights, they are very impressive, and you certainly would have to balance up the chaos that might otherwise result. But I just would make the point that there is a case, I think, for looking across the board. I'm glad we're going to do that in the LTP, but certainly with respect of young people, the inner city people, definitely they have a good deal, in my view. The people a little further out in Auckland pay, I believe, a disproportionately higher part of that PT cost.
Councillor Fletcher, just to
Oh,
wrap it
thank
up.
you. I really just had a point of clarification here. Whilst this paper has come to us in light of the review specific to senior citizens, if you read B carefully, it isn't limiting it to senior citizens. It's just asking NZTA to actually give consideration to what it intends from concessionary fares. So it wouldn't preclude those issues that have been raised by Councillor Darby and others here this morning. So I think it is an opportunity to get clarity in and around that. And I think the other thing that we could do, and I concur with Councillor Darby on the issue of health and wellness, and I think to that end, it's a shame that we've chosen with the Auckland plan not to have an objective of wellness or health in one of those key themes. I know that it's something that both Councillor Casey and myself have been very keen to see us adopt as part of the Auckland plan. So perhaps that's something that we can also bring better advocacy to.
So Councillor Fletcher, you'll move those two resolutions?
I'm happy to move, thank you.
We have a seconder, Councillor Collins, thank you very much. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Thank you, guys, but you're staying on for the next item, EMUs. So, right, we're going to the budget update.